You have felt something today that has no name in your language. Maybe it was the specific melancholy of a Sunday evening when the weekend is ending. Maybe it was the peculiar satisfaction of finishing a task you had been avoiding. Maybe it was that strange mix of joy and sadness when you see an old photograph. Nostalgia, but sharper, more complicated than that word captures. Humans have been feeling things that outrun their words for as long as there have been humans. And different cultures have found radically different names for the emotional experiences that matter most to them. Portuguese speakers have saudade, a deep, melancholic longing for something beloved that is gone. The Japanese have mono, no aware, the gentle, bittersweet awareness of impermanence. The Germans have schadenfreude, the pleasure at another's misfortune. The Danes have hygge, the warmth of cozy togetherness. The Filipinos have jiggle, the uncontrollable urge to squeeze or pinch something irresistibly cute. These are not just translation curiosities. They suggest that human emotional experience is shaped by language and culture in ways that are genuinely different across societies. And here is where it gets extraordinary. Underneath all of that cultural variation, there are emotions that are recognized across every human society ever studied. Expressions that need no translation. Feelings that appear to be wired into the human face before language, before culture, before any particular civilization shaped them. The question of which emotions are truly universal, hardwired into our species, versus which are constructed by our cultural experience has been one of the most contentious debates in the history of psychology. And in the last decade, the science has produced findings that are reshaping the answer in ways nobody expected. Start with the foundational claim. In the 1960s, psychologist Paul Ekman traveled to Papua New Guinea and showed photographs of emotional expressions to the Four People, a group that had had almost no contact with Western culture or media. If emotional expressions were culturally learned, as many anthropologists at the time believed, the Four should have struggled to interpret the facial expressions of Americans and Europeans. Instead, they identified them with striking accuracy: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, surprise. Ekman concluded that these 6 expressions were universal, biologically hardwired into the human face, recognized across all cultures because they were expressions of emotions that every human being experiences regardless of where or when they were born. This became one of the most cited findings in all of psychology. It was the bedrock of the universality of emotion theory. For decades, the 6 basic emotions were treated as settled science. Then researchers started looking more carefully, and the story became more complicated. Psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett at Northeastern University spent years re-examining the evidence. Her critique was pointed. Ekman's studies used forced choice methodology. Participants were given a list of emotion words and asked to match them to faces. When researchers instead asked people to describe emotional expressions in their own words without being given options, cross-cultural agreement dropped significantly. The universality, Barrett argued, may have been partly an artifact of how the question was asked. Barrett's own theory, constructed emotion, proposes something more radical. She argues that emotions are not hardwired biological programs that produce specific, universal expressions. Instead, emotions are constructed by the brain in the moment, drawing on the body's internal state, past experience, and the conceptual categories the brain has learned to use. Different cultures carve the emotional space differently, giving different shape and meaning to experiences that might otherwise blur together. In Barrett's framework, what you feel is not retrieved from a fixed library of universal emotions. It is actively constructed, in real time, by a brain trying to make meaning out of a cascade of physiological signals. But the debate did not end there. A landmark 2019 study published in the journal Nature Human Behavior, led by Alan Cowen and Dr. Keltner at UC Berkeley, used a radically different methodology. Rather than showing photographs of posed expressions and asking people to label them, they showed thousands of short videos of emotional expressions to observers from the United States and India, 2 cultures with very different emotional norms, and asked them to rate what they saw across dozens of dimensions. The result: 28 distinct emotional states were recognized with significant consistency across the 2 cultures. Not 6, 28. And the patterns of recognition, when visualized, showed a consistent emotional landscape, a map of how different emotional states relate to each other. That was strikingly similar across the 2 very different populations. This suggested something more nuanced than either Ekman or Barrett had proposed. not a small set of discrete, universally recognizable basic emotions, not a purely culturally constructed emotional world with nothing shared across cultures. Instead, a rich, complex emotional landscape with more cross-cultural consistency than Barrett's framework predicted, and more nuance and gradation than Ekman's basic emotions captured. So what is actually universal? The emerging consensus points to something deeper than facial expressions, and more fundamental than the specific names cultures give to feelings. What appears to be universal is the underlying architecture of the emotional system, the way emotions are organized along certain core dimensions. Specifically, valence, how pleasant or unpleasant a feeling is, and arousal, how activating or calming it is. These two dimensions appear to structure emotional experience across cultures in consistent ways, even when the specific labels and expressions vary. There also appears to be a set of functional emotional states, states tied to specific survival challenges, that emerge reliably across human populations, states associated with threat detection, states associated with social bonding and connection, states associated with disgust and contamination avoidance, states associated with achievement and status. Not because these states are expressed identically across all cultures, but because the underlying biological pressures that produce them are shared across the species. Here is what this means for the 7 emotions in the title. The number 7 comes from more recent research synthesizing findings across multiple methodologies. While Ekman proposed 6 basic emotions, subsequent work expanded the list. Contempt was added. The 7th. When evidence emerged that a specific contempt expression, involving one corner of the mouth pulling up and to the side, was recognized reliably across cultures, including those with no prior Western contact. 7 has become the most commonly cited number of reliably cross-cultural emotional states, though researchers continue to debate where exactly to draw the lines. But here is what the science keeps returning to. The question of whether emotions are universal or cultural is, in important ways, the wrong question, because the answer is both at different levels. At the level of underlying biology and functional purpose, human emotional experience has deep universal structure, shaped by millions of years of evolution solving the same fundamental problems of survival and social life. At the level of specific experience, expression, and meaning, emotions are profoundly shaped by culture, language, and individual history. The Japanese mono no aware is not the same as the Western concept of melancholy. Saudade is not simply longing. Hig is not just coziness. These words capture genuinely distinct emotional experiences that culture has carved out and named. Experiences that might be felt less distinctly by people who have never been taught to distinguish them. Language does not just label emotions, it shapes them. When you learn a new emotion word, you gain the ability to construct that experience more precisely, to feel it as a distinct thing rather than a vague blur. This is the most extraordinary finding in the science of emotion in the last 2 decades. You are not just discovering your emotions. You are constructing them in real time, using the conceptual tools your culture has given you. The 7 emotions your face can express to anyone on Earth, the states that need no translation, are the ancient foundation. They are the grammar of a language your species has spoken for tens of thousands of years. Everything else, every word for a feeling that does not translate, every nuance your culture has taught you to feel, is the poetry, the elaboration, the extraordinary flowering of a biological seed into the full complexity of human emotional life. You feel things today that have no name, but somewhere on Earth, someone found a word for it. And the moment you learn that word, you will feel it more completely.